That was the problem in Galatia too. People in Galatia wanted to hang on for dear life to the rituals of the Old Testament law, particularly circumcision. And Paul discusses in Galatians 3 the relationship in which the covenant established with Abraham 430 years before the law was given was a covenant that the law could not alter or change or nullify. So when he gets finished with that argument and he said the promise to Abraham stands, and he faces the question, well, what good did the law do? What good did it do? Israel couldn't keep it. And then he makes this remarkable statement. You can look it up if you want, Galatians 3:16. The law was our schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. Still that today, by the way. But it was especially that in the Old Testament. Among the Romans of Paul's day, there were many, many Greek slaves that had been brought to Rome and sold in the market and really throughout the Mediterranean world. Slaves which had been captured in Greece. Slaves in many instances who were far superior than their captors, who were far better educated, who were far more skilled in their work, and who were in many respects superior to the rather uncivilized Romans at that time. And so these wealthy Romans would buy these slaves to work for them, and some of them of exceptional ability would be given the responsibility for the education of the children. That is, these slaves had to see to it that the children went to school every morning. These slaves had to see to it that the children did their homework and that they were prepared for the next day's classes. And the master said to these slaves, "Be sure that my children learn their lessons. And if they won't do it and they rebel and they're lazy, you may whip them." They have to learn their lessons. Now Paul says that's how the law served the nation of Israel. That was the good of the law. The law came to Israel and said, and this was the very heart and core of the law, do this and live. Keep my commandments and live as my covenant people. But break my law, and you are cursed. And so, because Israel could not keep the law of God, the law was like a schoolmaster that took the rod of the curses of the law and beat upon these children. Learn your lesson, learn your lesson, learn your lesson. And every time Israel failed to keep the law beat them with its curses. What was the lesson they had to learn? Christ. That's what they had to learn. Christ. The law was their schoolmaster to bring them to Christ. When Israel, believing Israel now, as I say, unbelieving Israel didn't care about any of that. Believing Israel, when they stood confronted with the demands of the law, and when they said, I can't do it, I can't keep the law, is the covenant forever impossible? Then the same law said to them, go to Christ. That's where you must find your salvation. Not in the law, but in Christ. And so the law led them to Christ. Now it still does that today. As you know, Lord's Day 2 talks about the fact that by the law we have the knowledge of our misery, because we cannot keep the law of God, and we learn how miserable and wretched we are. And so the law says to us, go to Christ. Go to Christ. James in the first chapter of his epistle talks about the law as a mirror into which we look and see ourselves reflected. And when we look in that mirror and see ourselves reflected in the mirror of the law, we can hardly bear to look, because the reflection that comes from that mirror of the law is of a filthy, ragged, foul, diseased, wretched person. But then, when the believer continues to look in that law, gradually in that law comes out the cross and the Son of God on the cross. And he sees himself reflected now not only in the law, but in Christ. And so James calls that law the royal, because it belongs to the kingdom of heaven, the royal law of liberty. So that was why the epistle to the Hebrews says, it was good. It was good. Don't throw it all away. It was good because it was the schoolmaster to bring to Christ. But the new covenant is better because then Christ comes. And then the covenant is realized in Christ. So that brings me to my second point. Now I want to call your attention to the fact, in connection with this second point, that first of all, the scriptures make it very clear, time and time again, the law is important. And not only is the law itself important, but the keeping of the law is important. We are not antinomians. We don't, standing in the new dispensation, say, as the antinomians of Luther's day said, hang Moses on the scaffold, burn the law in fire. We're done with the law. We're saved by grace. The law means nothing. Oh no. Oh no. When the law in the Old Testament already was the means to drive the people to Christ, with the whip of its curses, the law was serving a good purpose. And the teaching of God in all this was, don't simply dismiss the law as unimportant and as having no relevance in the new dispensation. Oh no! Oh no. What is the difference then between the new administration of the covenant, what the text calls the new covenant, and the old? Well, it's simply this. While in the Old Testament, God said, I will establish my covenant with you if you keep the law. In the new dispensation, God says to you and to me, I will establish my covenant with you, and you don't have to do a thing. Not a thing. I'll do it all.